Hello, welcome back to vectordream. My name's Anthony, and this is part 2 of my series on AuZtralia, the 1 to 4 player game on Tabletopia right now, soon to be on Kickstarter. And in this video, I'm going to explain what all the actions in the game mean, what you can do, and some other rules. And then in the next video, we're going to jump into gameplay. So stay tuned for that. But let's get to the computer and get started. Okay, let's jump into the next part of this by explaining all these action spaces here. By explaining these, a lot of this stuff out here will become more clear. Also too, before I get started with that, I'd like to explain the time track really quick. When we're talking about these discs out here, the one in the lowest possible time slot is the active player. So this player would get to go first. If they were stacked like this, the red disc would also get to go first. If there's a tie for discs there, the top one goes first, and then they would get to go after that. So I just wanted to explain the nuances of that really quick. Let me put these back. Also too, any action that we do will cost us time. So we're going to be expending time on this track to perform actions. Anytime you reach or surpass space 53, you are no longer able to take any more actions. So that would basically be the end of the game. So let's go ahead and explain the different actions down here. So the first one is to lay railway or build railway. And this one in particular allows you to build on coastal hexes or outback hexes. And when we take actions down here, before I get into that too much, we're going to be using these cubes in the HQ. So the cubes in the HQ represent how many actions we're able to take and how much damage we're able to deal to old ones out there before we have to reset. And I'll talk about resetting or getting back your cubes later. Okay, so what you're going to do is be placing a cube out here on the board and taking the action that you want to take. So you only place one cube, for the action that you want. However, if you wanted to take this action again, you could place another cube out there, but you would have to pay a gold piece for every cube that's already on it. So in this example, there's already one cube out there. We would pay 1 gold and then be able to put another cube out here to take this action again. And you can do that as many times as you want. So now you would have to pay 2 gold to put another cube out there, and so on and so forth. So there is a way to to do multiple actions like that. I'll keep this out there. Okay, so back to the explanation of this action. So as I said, this one is to build railway, and you could build it in coastal or outback regions only. You cannot build this in the hill regions, and I'll show you why in a second. This will cost 2 time, 1 coal, and 1 iron. Now, as you see, this action down here is the exact same thing, except it allows you to build in hill regions as well. So any hex, basically, you can use this action for to build railway. It has the same cost of coal and iron, 1 of each, and then it costs 3 time instead of 2 time. Thematically, it's because, building railway through hills just takes longer. So once you take this action, you're going to grab 2 tracks, and these are going to allow you to build 2 railway tracks in 1 action. So you're going to grab 2 tracks from here, and let me bring this down here. So let's pretend our port was here. Basically, when you build a railway track for the first time in the game, you have to connect it to your port. Anytime after that, you are able to build a track in other directions, but they would have to stay connected to your existing railway. Like, you can't put the second one over here, and have them separate like that. You have to keep building forward with your railway system. So the other particular is that there can only ever be 1 railway track across one side of a hex. So for example, if this is already here, another player or you cannot come in here and build another track. There's just no reason to do that. But you could build it here, so you could have another track going that way if you want. And this leads me into my next point, that a hex can have railways from different players connecting to it. So So another player could also connect to this hex just from a different side of the hex. You cannot build a railway into a hex containing an old one face up or face down. So we wouldn't be able to build here because there is an old one there, even though it's face down. We would have to defeat that old one first, and that will be explained later. Okay, to be able to extend your railway network, you must be able to trace a path of hexes via your existing network that are free of old ones. So what that means, let's go back to this. Let's say this old one was here. I wouldn't be able to continue building this railway network because the old one is blocking our path. We can't trace a line from the port going out to where we want to build. So that is something to keep in mind. Now, if he was here, we could theoretically build here and start building a new railway system, but you won't really want to do that just because it's going to take a lot of time and you really want to focus on the one network that you have so you can get out into this outback as far as possible. You got phosphates out here and all kinds of other things. So there is that to consider. The next last key point to this action would be the number of tracks you have is the maximum you can place. So if you've noticed over here, you have 2 stacks of 10, so 20 total tracks. Once those are placed on the board, you can no longer build any more tracks on the board. So you would be maxed out. All right, so let's move on to the next action. And the next action is called mining or mine. So what you're going to do here is you're going to take a cube, you're going to place it out there. It's going to cost you 1 time on the time track. And you're going to be able to mine anything that's connected to your railway network. And of course, it needs to be free of old ones. So if an old one was here, we couldn't mine this phosphate right now. So let me put him back. So if we wanted to do the mine action, we would place that cube as stated, and then you would go out here and mine for 1 resource within a given hex. Let's say these 3 were over here. You would have to choose one. You could not mine everything in this hex. You would have to choose 1 resource, but you take all of that resource. So if the 3 coal were here, and you wanted that, you could take all 3 coal. But in this case, there is only a phosphate. Now, as I stated in my previous video, phosphates are worth victory points at the end of the game, and you also get a gold piece for mining them immediately. So that's something to consider. And that would be the mining action. Now there's 2 different mining actions, so you don't have to put a second cube here if you don't want, because there's another one down here that you can utilize. And when those are filled up, then, if you wanted to mine some more, then you're going to have to pay gold. Okay, let's talk about the next action, and that is to take a personality card. Place your cube, it costs 1 time. Then you would go out here and select one of these cards. Let's say we selected this one and put it in my player area. Then I would draw another card to fill in here. If I had taken her, I would have to shift these over. Oops. I would have to shift these over first, then draw a new card for this spot here. So let me reset all that. And while I'm resetting this, the last thing to think about with these cards is that there is no limit to the amount of cards you can have. So you can have as many personality cards as you desire if you have the time to get them. Okay, so let's talk about the next action, and that is to buy a military unit. Now you can see the costs are listed here, and they're also listed out there. Now on this action, you can only buy 1 single military unit. You can't buy multiples. However, if you're buying infantry, you can buy 2 infantry at the same time for 1 gold each. That's what this means right here. It's the only unit where you can do that. Everything else is just 1. So if you decide to buy the airship, then that would be the end of your action. And you would place anything that you buy, let's say you bought this, down here in your barracks. And then later on, when you go to attack, they would move up to the expeditionary force area. I'll explain that later when we go over the attack action. So just keep in mind that you can only buy 1 unit on your turn for this action, except for infantry. If you want, you can only buy 1 if you want, but if you want to buy 2, they cost 1 gold each. One more quick thing I wanted to point out is this table here that's in your barracks. This table shows you what units are effective against what kind of monster you're fighting. For example, Cthulhu here, infantry are poor against him. So if Cthulhu's out there, you may not want to recruit infantry at that time or whatever. Armored car, same story, but the train is good, artillery is good. So based on these monsters that are out there, this table could help you decide on what units you want to buy when you take this action to buy units. I just wanted to point that out. Also note there are a limited number of military tiles out here. Once they're gone, they're gone. Okay, so the next action is to import export. And on this action, you get to perform 2 of these actions in any order you wish. And the first sub-action here is to take 1 iron or 1 coal from the supply and put it in your warehouse. The next one says that you can sell 1 iron or 1 coal to get 1 gold and then put that gold in your warehouse. Now, it says perform twice here, so I believe that you can perform this particular sub-action twice if you want. So you could export twice to get 2 gold. Otherwise, you could do a combination of these, 1 here, in any order that you wish. Okay, so let's talk about the next action, which is placing farms on the board. As you can see, there's an X here, which means for as many farms as you place, that's the time cost you're going to have to pay. It's all kind of noted right here, so I'll just explain it very quickly. For this action, you can place up to 3 farms, but they all have to be different. So you could place 1 of each farm. You cannot place, like, for example, 3 cattle farms or something like that. They all have to be different. And for each farm that you're able to place on the board, you would get 1 gold each. So that's just like thematically that you're harvesting or whatever and gaining money from those farms that are on the board. So let's take an example. So let's say I wanted to build this corn farm and maybe a sheep farm. If I go out here and look at this, my railway network that I currently have can't really support that. Like, I could place the corn farm because corn farms have to be placed in these hexes here. Cattle farms have to be here, and sheep have to be in the outback here. Since there's a resource in this hex, I cannot place a farm there. If there's a resource or an old one in this hex at all, you can't place a farm there. Let's remove that. So let's say it's like that. I could come up here and build my corn farm here, and I could build my sheep farm here because it's empty. Now, the only other thing you have to consider is your railway network. You cannot build farms that are off your railway network. Like, I couldn't build the corn farm here, or I couldn't build that sheep farm over there. It has to be connected to your railway network. And of course, your railway network, you have to be able to trace a path from your port to the place you're trying to build. So if the old one was here, I can't build any farms here. In fact, if it was there, I couldn't build any farms anywhere because you also can't place within the hex that has your port. So that's another thing to consider. The last point about farms is the maximum number of farms that you can build is the tiles that you have here. Once these tiles are placed on the board, you cannot build any more farms. So that's how the farm action works. Okay, one more thing to talk about with the farms is, let me put this out here. Each farm placed is worth 2 victory points at the end of the game. However, if an old one moves on to a farm, it can get flipped over to the blighted side, and at that point you would get no victory points for that farm at the end of the game. So you want to protect these farms as much as possible. Okay, so let's talk about the attack action. I have put a cube here, and it costs X time, and I will explain how much time we're going to have to pay for this in just a moment. To fully illustrate how this works, I grabbed some units to put in my barracks down here. There are 3 key steps you have to do when you first take an attack action, and those steps are, the first one would be to commit units to your expeditionary force. The second step would be to select a hex you have an off-rail range to be able to attack. And the third step to get going with this action would be to pay the time cost. Then we would move into resolving combat, and I'll show you that after these 3 steps. So when you look at your units here, they have 2 numbers on them. The number to the left is your off-rail range that you could use to attack something, and the other number to the right is the attack damage that you can withstand. So for example, this infantry can go 1 hex off rail to attack something and can take up to 2 damage before he dies. So let's go ahead and look at here on the board. These 2 old ones are face down. You can attack a face up or face down old one. And I'll explain the difference here in just a moment. So let's pretend that we were going to attack this particular old one. So our rail network starts at the port, and we trace a line to where we want to get off of the rail to go attack. So our railway ends here. So we need at least a combat range or off-rail range of 1 hex to get to this old one. And our infantry can do that. The armored car can go 2 hexes off rail. Artillery can go 1. Airship can go 4 hexes off rail, which is pretty far. And the armored train can go 0, which means the armored train cannot attack anything that's not on the actual rail network. So this old one would have to be here for us to be able to attack it with the armored car. Something to keep in mind. So let's go ahead and commit our expeditionary forces. So let's go here with the infantry, let's bring the armored car, and let's bring this airship. So we've committed those units to the battle. Now, we select what hex we want to battle, and it would be this one. So that old one is our target. Now, so I don't have to flip this over because this game is set up. I don't want to mess with that. So I'm just going to bring another hex out because I can shuffle those later. And I want to flip this over to show that this is the monster we're going to fight. Okay, so now that we've committed our forces, we've decided on this hex, now we flip over the old one, and now we have a chance to withdraw. Now, if this was face up and we decided to attack, we have to attack. There's no withdrawal right at the beginning like this. But since the hex was, since the old one was face down, we went there to attack it, we found out what it was, and we decided to withdraw. We could do that. So that's something to keep in mind about face down old ones. Alright, but we're going to go ahead and attack this one because it looks kind of weak with only 2 points of damage, and we feel with our expeditionary force here that we could take it down. So now we pay the time cost. So how is the time cost calculated? Well, you're only going to pay time for the top 3 units. The airship and the armored train do not cost any time to bring with you. Now, in this case, we would pay 2 time. But you might be thinking, well, we brought 2 infantry and 1 armored car. That's 3 units. Shouldn't it be 3 time? No, you only pay the time cost for the type of units you are bringing, not how many units you are bringing. So we brought infantry, that costs 1 time, and we can bring any amount of infantry we want for 1 time. We brought 1 armored car, that's 1 time. We did not bring artillery, so no time incurred there. So this would cost us 2 time. We would pay that cost, then we would move on into resolving combat. One little thing I almost forgot. When you send out units to your expeditionary force, like I said, you only pay time for these 3 because the airship and armored train don't cost you time to send out with other units. However, there is always a minimum cost of 1 time point. So what does that mean? Well, let's say that I only sent my airship and nothing else. I would still have to pay 1 time point because there is a minimum cost to sending out units to an expeditionary force when you enter combat. If I had sent an airship and an armored train, that still only cost me 1 time point because, as described before, these two don't cost you any time to send out if they're with other units, namely these 3 above it. So just one little thing to keep in mind. So how is combat resolved? Well, there are 3 key steps to resolving combat. The first step is to make sure that you have your 3 sanity tokens here at the beginning of every battle. You get these 3 tokens to use for each battle, so you want to make sure those are there. The second step would be to start drawing old one cards to resolve this combat. So let's go ahead and draw the first one, and we would flip this over. Now, when you look at this, you'll see that we have a middle column of old ones and a lot of icons left and right. So the left side of this card is for our combat damage. So for example, let's find the monster that we're attacking, and I'll explain the circles later. They have nothing to do with combat. Those are more pertaining to movement of the old ones, which I'll talk about later. So we go down this middle column, we go down this middle column and we find the monster that we're dealing with. Now, we look to the left and we see that there's an armored train and an armored car pictured. We don't have an armored train in this battle in our expeditionary force, but we do have an armored car. So we would take one of our cubes. Actually, there's already one out here. We take one of our cubes and we place it on the monster. So that means he can take 1 more point of damage before he dies. However, the right-hand column is for the damage he does to our forces. Since an airship is pictured, he will do 1 point of damage to our airship. Now, our airship can only take 2. So, something to think about for the next step. Now, since we've resolved this card, we have to decide whether or not we want to withdraw. We can completely withdraw from this battle if we want. There is one nuance to that, though, in the fact that the airship is unique in the sense that when deciding on whether to withdraw or not, we could simply just withdraw the airship, remove the damage from it, and that way we preserve our airship and it doesn't get destroyed, and we can keep these units in the battle to keep going. The airship is the only unit you can do this with. You can't withdraw your armored car and leave your infantry out there. The airship's the only one. Conversely, though, we could withdraw all other expeditionary forces besides our airship and continue fighting. So the airship is just unique in the fact that you can withdraw it or withdraw everything else and keep it in to the battle. Damage cube there. Now, if the infantry units take another point of damage, I have to remove one of those infantry units that I brought. So let's say another card just like that comes out next. I can assign that damage to the armored car. So I'm spreading out my damage in a way that I don't lose units that I don't have to lose. But eventually, there could be enough damage to where I'm going to have to lose some units. So I just wanted to show you that to make sure that I was telling you everything exactly correct. Okay, so one more thing about combat. Combat continues until you destroy the old one that you're fighting, you choose to withdraw, or you are defeated. There are a couple of things that happen when you're defeated in battle. To illustrate, let's put a cube on this infantry right here. So if you're defeated, which means you would have no military units left in combat, or you lost all your sanity tokens. So in this example, let's say we lost all 3 tokens, a card came out, and it was asking for another sanity token. If we can't provide the next sanity token because there's none left, we would then be defeated. So that's the second way you can be defeated. And in this case, since we were defeated, what we would have to do is finish resolving all effects of the old one card we drew. Then we must eliminate all units that have at least 1 damage or more on them. So in this case, the top tile here for our infantry units would be defeated, but we would get to keep this one and put it back into our barracks. So we would only lose him because he had 1 damage on him, Basically, that illustrates that he was at risk, and when we were defeated and forced to retreat, he just didn't make it back. And as stated, any remaining units after that step are moved back to the barracks, and then that's it. That's the end of the attack action. It's got a few steps. It sounds like a lot, but once you play, it's actually really smooth. Okay, there's one more thing to add about combat. If you flip over an old one and it's any one of these, you would use this out here to put your damage cubes on. And in a case like this, it's slightly different. If you're attacking a stronger old one, as illustrated in these boxes here, and you put 5 cubes on one because he can take 6 damage, you could then exchange those 5 cubes for 1 disc. That's a way to preserve some of your action cubes here if you needed to. And why would you want to do that? Well, because this leads into my next and final action. These cubes represent, as I stated before, how much damage you can do to old ones and how many actions you're able to take. Once this is empty, you would have to spend 2 time to get all your cubes back at that time. But if you do this action here before that happens, you only have to spend 1 time to get all your action cubes back. Now, any damage cubes that are out here, like let's say he did have 5 damage, would stay out there. Or in this particular case, let's say he had a damage on him, that would stay out there. You wouldn't be able to take this action for 1 time and get those cubes back. This action only pertains to these action spaces here. So that's pretty much all the actions. I know it sounds like a lot, but it's actually really smooth once you're playing. Okay, there's one more combat scenario that I need to talk about, and it's called defending your port. If at any time old ones reach your port, because they can move, you will immediately have to fight that old one to defend your port. And there's a couple particulars about that. The first particular is all your forces down here in your barracks have to move to the expeditionary force area. It's all hands on deck when defending your port from an old one attack. Secondly, the attack that's happening here does not cost you any time points. So when defending your port, you don't have to expend any time. You cannot choose to withdraw. This is a fight to the death, basically. And everything is resolved exactly as already described by drawing these cards. Flipping them over and then, resolving the entire card. If defeated, all of your units are eliminated and your port is removed from play. The defeat conditions still remain, meaning if you lose all your sanity, you are defeated. If you lose all your forces, you are defeated, just like before. There is one little nuance though. If you eliminate all of the old ones at the same time that you are defeated, you will still suffer eliminations as described earlier when there's only 1 point of damage on something. That's when you suffer eliminations, meaning if you had 2 infantry here and there was 1 point of damage on top of that stack, you would lose the top infantry unit but retain the one that's below it. I described that earlier in the video. You would still suffer those eliminations, but you would not lose your port and you would be able to stay in the battle. Now, if all your forces are completely eliminated, there's no eliminations to suffer. An example of this would be, let's say this card came out and it took our, all of our sanity was gone and we were defeated. But prior to that, when we were looking at our combat damage dealt to the old one, and we also defeated him, so it would be like both sides were defeated at the same time, then you would suffer eliminations, but you would also get to keep your port, which means you're still in the game. So there is that tiny little nuance there for defending your port. Okay, I'm going to end this video there, and in the next video, we're going to jump on into gameplay. There's one other thing to talk about, and we can talk about that during the game once we get to that point on how old ones move and take actions and stuff. All right, until then, I will talk to you on the next one. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.